John Laurito, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation today. I know you have your own podcast. You have a lot of experience around these topics that we're going to be exploring about leadership shifts, recognizing leadership potential in others, and really helping to attract and retain your A players within the organization. So all really great topics, things that I'm super interested and passionate about, and the types of topics that you explore a lot in your own podcast and in your own work. As we get started, I just wanted to share John's bio with everybody. For 20 plus years, John Laurito has been leading organizations in the financial services industry. John has developed a reputation as a turnaround expert with 4 successful and dramatic transformations of organizations. These included leading the 100th ranked out of 110 Ameriprise office in Hartford, Connecticut to the #1 in the country, and taking a Boston agency of Penn Mutual from last in national ranking to winning the prestigious President's Award twice, an Excellence Award 3 times. He currently speaks on stages worldwide on the topic of leadership and is the host of Tomorrow's Leader podcast. Again, great background, obviously some really exceptional experience. I look forward to talking with you and giving you a chance to share with my listeners your expertise and possible tips for how they can thrive in their own organizations.
You got it, Jonathan. That was one heck of an intro.
Well, let's continue along that vein. So I would love to just hear from you a little bit more about your background, a little bit more personal context, and how did you get to where you're at and doing what you're doing?
So I started in leadership. Probably I started originally as a financial advisor once I got out of school, and I probably 3 or 4 years in, I started training and developing people, and I got bit by the bug. I just loved leadership, and I've always been intrigued by leadership. I've always been fascinated by people that have a lot of influence and positive impact, and why they have so much influence and positive impact. I've just always been fascinated and studied it. So when I got into leadership, I realized how passionate I was. I enjoyed it. I was good at it. I obviously made a lot of mistakes as well and learned from that. But I started getting, I think after 20 years of leading organizations in the financial services community, I started to work on developing other people outside the industry. I started to get involved in speaking and being asked to speak at different conferences. And that started to get me thinking more about doing this on kind of in a broader way and being able to impact more people. So at the beginning of this year, after thinking about it and planning it for a couple of years, at the beginning of this year, I went off on my own and started my own consulting and leadership training and development business, which is what I do now. And I love it. Interesting time because, a month or less than a month after I went on my own is when the COVID pandemic hit and transformed all of our lives. But there's been a tremendous amount of positive things that have come from that. And I would not change a thing about it in terms of the timing of when I went off on my own. So that's what I'm doing. And that's a little bit about my background.
Fascinating. I appreciate you sharing that. And, it's an interesting story. I've heard it repeated, a similar type of story repeated many, many times this year, just because COVID caught everyone off guard so much. And you're not the first person that decided to hang out their shingle, and then all of a sudden had their world turned upside down. But as you mentioned, just though there's difficulties that come with something like a pandemic and the type of shift that we've been seeing, it also provides a lot of new opportunities. And I've certainly experienced both sides of that myself. I've seen both for me personally, my wife, my family, things that have been challenging and difficult, but other new things that have come from all of this that wouldn't have emerged otherwise. And so not to minimize anyone's pain or grief or the challenges that they might be facing, but I do think that, when we face difficulties, oftentimes there are opportunities that come amidst those challenges.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think what's happened is, everybody's been forced out of their comfort zone, whatever that's been, and businesses, people in general, we've all had to adapt in some way, and our lives have changed. I mean, even the way that we conduct business. I know many businesses that everything was done physically in person, and they've now converted entirely to doing things over Zoom meetings. And I think people, because of that, have realized, wow, there's a lot. I can't tell you how many leaders I've talked to that have said, wow, you know what? We're going to change our model permanently. We are not going to house everybody in expensive real estate in an office. We're going to allow people to work from home because they're actually more productive, and we can actually build an organization even more effectively and do what we're trying to do more effectively this way. And it's really transformed people. I think, I know when I started my business, my vision was I was going to be speaking on a stage every single week. And I remember when I left in January or in February, I had keynote presentations booked. I had a TED Talk booked, all this stuff. And very quickly it all evaporated. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, I almost, went into panic mode. I'm like, what am I going to, this was my business. But it forced me in a different direction. I do virtual presentations now. I'm doing more consulting work that I never would have been doing had I stuck to my original plan. It pushed me in a whole new direction that's actually paid off tremendously well, because I can do what I love doing in a different environment and a different delivery mechanism. And so I think about that. I know a lot of businesses there's some businesses that have just been paralysis. They've been paralyzed. They don't know what to do. They didn't adapt. They didn't pivot. And because of that, unfortunately, they're not doing well, or some are gone out of business. But I also know many businesses that have thrived because they've changed their model and thought differently. And it's just pushed people to a whole stepping outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, and stepping outside the comfort zone is really what's required, I think, of a modern leader. That actually brings me to my first real question for you today. I know you talk about leadership shifts, and certainly, something like a pandemic has upturned everyone's world and requires organizations to pivot. It requires leaders to think and function in a different way. So what are some of those characteristics that you've seen as this shift has been happening in recent years, but also during the pandemic, in response to shifting geopolitical landscape, socioeconomic shifts, technological disruptions? I mean, there's all these different drivers, pushing us in new directions in terms of leadership and what we need from the leaders of tomorrow. What are you seeing in terms of that shift?
I think the leader, tomorrow's leader, which is the name of my podcast and the name of my book that's coming out, which I'm always thinking about, what does tomorrow's leader really look like, and what are they, and what are they not? I think the days of leaders being these authoritative, commanding style of leaders, I think that's going to be, and really has become, almost a thing of the past. I think tomorrow's leader really is someone who is empathetic. They are really understanding their people. They are much more relationship based than ever before, because leadership is about influencing people in a positive way. And it's not just enough for a leader to tell people what to do or even where we're going, but they really need to tap into and help people understand why. And to do that, they also need to understand, the why behind their people. What really motivates them, what really satisfies them. And tomorrow's leader, I think, is that type of person that really does. They understand the people in their organization, and they help them get behind the vision that's a powerful vision, but that also has a strong why behind it. And so I think that's what this shift has been about. I think this year it's much more than just getting results. It's much more about, the number. It's much more than just the numbers. It's about, doing things the right way. It's about connecting people. People are feeling isolated. They're feeling they're on an island. They're dealing with emotions that they haven't really dealt with, or situations that they haven't dealt with before. And leaders, it's not just about the business, it's about their life. And I think that's really what the shift has been around.
Yeah, I really like that. Getting to the why of work, why organizations function the way they do, why leaders are leading the way they do, why the people in their teams are there and doing the work that they're doing, what motivates them, what drives them. And our people aren't a monolith, and so even if we have threads of similarity across our teams in terms of skills, competencies, capabilities, even motivations, the reality is everyone's in different life stages. Everyone has different salient drivers, and unless we know our people, we're not going to be in a position to leverage their capabilities, and we're not going to help draw out their potential, right? And I in my mind, that's one of the foremost functions of an effective leader, is that they see the potential in their team, and they help their team to see their own potential, and then they help to create an environment where that can come out, right?
Yeah.
And then you maximize potential, you maximize performance, you maximize innovation, and that drives competitive advantage in the marketplace. And it helps the organization succeed, it helps the leader succeed, it helps the individuals succeed. All across the board, it's a win-win-win. And that's what we want. And that doesn't happen with an authoritarian style. It doesn't happen when you have someone dictating and seeking compliance with the edicts that they send out, to the organization or to their team. It happens as you empower people, as you give people the opportunity to try things iteratively and even fail, because failing can then lead to learning and lead to new innovations. And as we create that kind of a safe environment for those types of characteristics to be in place, and that kind of a culture to emerge, then you see so much more come out of your team, far more than could ever possibly come from you being the person dictating to everyone what needs to happen, when and why, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really about developing people. There's two different mentalities. There's a mentality that, okay, as a company or as a leader, I'm always trying to determine who the best people are and who the people in the middle are and who the people on the bottom are, and cut the bottom people and recruit in better people. But in reality, the best leaders I've seen are the ones that understand that developing people is key, even your top people. Because your top people, your very top people, they may love you, they may love the company, but if they're not growing, they're going to go somewhere else. And top people need to feel really three things. They need to feel that they are growing. They need to feel that they are making an impact to the company or the organization or the world around them. And they also need to feel recognized. And if they're not, then they're ultimately not going to be there. But the leaders that really understand that developing people, a lot of companies have gone away with the annual performance review. And the reason why is not because reviewing performance is not important, but they realize, we're doing it once a year. Why are we doing it once a year? Now, that's better than not doing it at all. But the formal, performance reviews, sit down, review, and then that's going to dictate your income and all, blah, blah, your raise, your bonus, whatever. The smart leaders and the smart companies have adopted a whole different philosophy. And that's more on the spot feedback. It's, hey, I caught you doing something well, I'm going to give you feedback. Or if you're not doing something well, I'm going to give you feedback. It's going to be real time. And I'm not going to wait till an annual performance review. Most employees in that annual performance review environment only get feedback literally during their annual performance review once a year. That's not developing people. That's doing it because you have to. I mean, you have to check a box and say you did it and write it up, and here's now your bonus or your raise. That's not leadership. That's more management. Leadership is truly caring enough about someone to help them fulfill their potential. And that's not going to come unless they're really getting feedback and they're getting input and they're getting guidance on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's so interesting to consider kind of the mentality shift. So we talked about leadership shift. Part of it is kind of an organizational shift, a mentality shift amongst workers. And we know millennial and Gen Z workers, they, again, they're not a monolith. There's nuance and difference across these age cohorts. But as a group, generally speaking, we know that they want to make an impact, right? They want to be recognized for the good stuff that they're doing, like you said, and they want coaching, mentoring, and feedback. And they want it in real time. They don't want to be waiting even for, not let alone an annual review, but not even a quarterly, right? They expect it on a regular, ongoing basis. And that's not how organizations have been set up to function traditionally, in large part because that's not what previous generations expected, right? And so now we're having to make this adjustment. And sometimes I think it's funny because you hear people bemoan the younger generation and how entitled they are, and they want to they want to change the world, and they expect, they're so needy, they need all of this attention and they need all this feedback. I'm like, I mean, on one level, maybe some of that, there's some truth to it. But on the other hand, I think they are just expecting what we've been teaching both executives and in business schools to students for decades now about what effective leadership is. They know what to expect, and they expect it, and they're not willing to put up with anything less. And when they don't have that experience, they're going to leave. They're going to go to the next organization to try to find that opportunity. And so, we can be kind of curmudgeonly and stick in the muds who want things to stay the way they have always been, and try to just get people to fit our old model. Good luck with that. I mean, that's just not going to work. We're not going to be fighting for the best talent if that's our approach as a leader or as an organization. And if we want to attract and retain A players, the bottom line is we need to meet them where they're at and help them progress. And I don't think it's unreasonable for a millennial or Gen Z worker to expect ongoing feedback from their boss.
No, and it's funny because we sometimes feel like, and the natural tendency is not to give feedback. Many people are just uncomfortable giving feedback. In leaders are uncomfortable giving feedback. They're uncomfortable being candid. And what I would say is, and there are times where I've been that way too, where I've felt like, maybe it's just easier for me to not tell them, give them the feedback or whatever. But you know what? That's ultimately doing that person a disservice. And granted, there are some people that don't like feedback. They don't want, or they just want positive. They don't want negative feedback. But there's such a thing. I used to oftentimes, and still do, contract for feedback, meaning that up front, I say, hey, Jonathan, I want you to do as best as I know you can. I want to help you fulfill your potential. When I catch you doing things that I see that you are doing well, and really I think are helping you really get to the level that you want to get to, are you okay with me pointing that out? Well, of course. Okay. Are you also okay if I see you doing things that are not contributing, that I really feel are taking away from where potentially can get to? Are you okay with me giving you that feedback? Yeah. So if you do that up front, then you've got the basis for a relationship that's going to be very much open to feedback. And then you've got to fulfill that promise. You've got to make sure you're doing that. So that's one way that leaders can really open the door for that. And it doesn't take long to build the culture around that too, because you want that. You want people expecting, wanting, and taking action on feedback. That's an organization that's growing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some tricks or approaches that you use in your experience with organizations and leadership to recognize and really see the potential in people, particularly leadership potential? Because we're talking about a leadership shift. We're talking about new skills and capabilities that perhaps weren't required of managers or leaders in the past, but are really necessary today. So how do you gauge that? How do you see, who has that potential, and then try to develop them, so they're ready to take on those roles when the time
Yeah.
comes?
That's such a great question, and it's such an important question. One is I always operate on the assumption that I have not, and I am not seeing the best that somebody has. As good as they are, you may be an A player, but I'm always operating on the assumption that you can even be better. But the other thing too is I'm not going to see the potential unless I'm putting you in a situation where I can see it. So oftentimes that might be having you do something that would be stepping outside your comfort zone, or doing something that's not in your normal, day to day. It might be putting somebody in a position to lead when they're not a leader. Hey, I'd like you to teach a class on this, or I'd like you to mentor this person, or I'd like you to have this conversation, or present at our next conference about something. And oftentimes, I've seen in those situations, you see the potential that somebody has. Wow, I saw you up there in front of the group. You did a great job. I can actually see you've got a potential to be a great leader. I don't think people in general leaders are giving their people in some cases opportunities to shine, and opportunities where that leader can spot the potential in people. You have to look for it. But that's what I coach leaders on. Put your people, give them stretch assignments, put them in situations, push them out of their comfort zone a little bit, and you'll start to see things in people that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And that's how you really develop people.
Yeah, the stretch assignments I think are really, really key. And I get it. It can be uncomfortable because you don't know how it's going to go. Called a stretch assignment because they haven't proven themselves in that area yet, right? And so sometimes it won't go great, and perhaps there will be some failure involved, or at least it won't live up to kind of the level that you hope it will. But you have to do it, and you mentor and you coach and you help them along, and then in many cases people will rise to the occasion, and they'll show you what they're made of, and then that brings it into play everything that you were just talking about. Then that provides a huge amount of benefit to the organization. And even if it doesn't go particularly well, even if it didn't work out, you still learned something important.
Mhm.
You've still given them the opportunity, and just because it didn't work this one time doesn't mean they won't be able to grow into that kind of
Mhm.
capabilities in the future. But it highlights the gaps, and it
Mhm.
highlights where the coaching, mentoring, and development can occur.
Exactly. Absolutely right. Yeah.
So you've already referred a little bit to keeping the best people. Let's say we have a great leader, they see potential in people, they're working along the lines that we've been discussing, um, but you find yourself in an organization or in a culture where you just see the best people leaving on a regular basis. What's going wrong there, and how can we stop that outflow of good talent?
Yeah, I think the organization and the leader has to really assess, what are we doing for our top people? How are we developing them? Because if they are not investing in those people, to my prior point, if they don't feel they're growing, they're going to go. Top people don't like that feeling of not growing, of getting stale, or plateauing. So I think that's the first thing. If you don't have a clear answer to that question, what am I doing? How are we investing in our top people? Then you're probably not, or you're not doing it enough. Very rarely do I see retention problems, or a lot of turnover in an organization that is doing that. Do you have a culture of promoting from within, or are you constantly looking for people outside? That's not good. You want to have an environment where you're promoting, not always from within, but certainly giving people opportunities, because that can be also very disheartening to an A player when they see those opportunities going to people that aren't in the organization. So those are typically the signs. the biggest signs that cause those problems.
Yeah, excellent. Well, John, it has been a real pleasure talking with you. The time has flown, and we're almost to the end of our time together today. But before we part ways, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you and give the final word on our topic today.
Thanks, Jonathan. They can get a hold of me either my website, which is lauritogroup.com. That's LAURITOGROUP.com. Or they can check out my podcast, which is Tomorrow's Leader, on all the podcast platforms as well as YouTube. And keep an eye out for my book coming out, which should be in the next few months, called Tomorrow's Leader.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, John. It's been a real pleasure. I hope listeners will reach out, get connected with John, check out his book, find out more about what he can do for you and your organization. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. I hope you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have